What's wrong? Why do you keep tossing and turning? Can't sleep? No. You didn't wake me up. So what's up? Why can't you fall asleep? Is there anything that's keeping you up? No, or are you just not tired yet? Well, do you want to do something? To help you fall asleep, of course. We both have a long day ahead of us tomorrow with classes and everything else. You want me to tell you a story? I mean, okay, what kind of story do you want me to tell you? A scary story? Because it's October? Are you sure? You're not gonna get scared, are you? No? Well, if you're really sure about it. I just brought a new book today. It's called 101 Horrifying Tales. So, if that doesn't tell you how scary it is, let me just look for a story that I could read to you. I think I found one that doesn't have a lot of speaking parts or pages, so... Well, if it did had a lot of speaking parts, then I'd do the voices. I mean, granted, they'd be like bad Mickey Mouse voices, but... You want me to do the Mickey Mouse voices? Right now? The last time I did that, you made fun of me. Okay, I'll do it, but only because I like you. Wait. Hey everyone, I'm going to take your soul and I will destroy everything you love. Okay, what? Hey, don't laugh. I'm trying to make you fall asleep. That's the end goal, not to keep you up at night. Okay. I found the story, but before I read it to you, let's get comfortable, okay? The book is called Accessory Before the Fact by Algernon Blackwood. Well, yeah, I have to say the author and the title of the story. Otherwise, how are you going to remember the book I read to you? Now, are you ready? Okay. You sure you're comfortable? Okay, I'll begin. At the moorland crossroads, Martin stood examining the signpost for several minutes in some bewilderment. The names in the 4 arms were not what he expected. Distances were not given, and his map, he concluded with some impatience, must be hopelessly out of date. Spreading it against the post, he stopped to study it more closely. The wind blew the corners, flapping it against his face. The small print was almost indecipherable in the fading light. It appeared, however, as well as he could make out, that 2 miles back he must have taken the wrong turn. You're saying that Martin reminds you of me? Listen, I only got lost once. Well, maybe it was twice. Or maybe it could have been more than that, but at least I have you wherever I go. You are my co-pilot after all. Okay, let's get comfortable. I'm gonna read again, okay? He remembered that turning. The path had looked inviting. He had desiccated a moment, then followed it, caught by the usual lure walkers that it might prove a shortcut. The shortcut snare is as old as human nature. For some minutes he had studied the signpost and the map alternatively. Dusk was falling, and his knapsack had grown heavy. He could not make out the 2 guides' tally, however, and a feeling of uncertainty crept over his mind. He felt oddly baffled, frustrated. His thought grew thick. Decision was most difficult. I I'm muddled, he thought. I must be tired. As at length he chose the most likely arm. Sooner or later it'll bring me to an inn, though not the one I intended. He accepted his walker's look and started briskly. The arm read, "Over Literacy Hill," in small, fine letters that danced and shifted every time he looked at them. But the name was not discoverable on the map. It was, however, inviting like the shortcut. A similar impulse again directed his choice, only this time it seemed more insistent, almost urgent. And he became aware then of the exceeding loneliness of the country about him. The road for 100 yards went straight, then curved like a white river running into space. The deep blue-green of the heather lined the banks, spreading upwards through the twilight, and occasional small pines stood solitary here and there, all unexplained. The curious adjective having made its appearance haunted him. So many things that afternoon were similarly unexplained. The shortcut, the darkened map, the names on the signpost, his own eccentric impulses, and the growing strange confusion that crept upon his spirit. The entire countryside needed explanation, though perhaps interpretation were the truer words. Those lonely little trees had made him see it. Why had he lost his way so easily? Why did he suffer vague impressions to influence his direction? Why was he here, exactly here, and why did he go now over Literacy Hill? Oh yeah, this man is so totally lost. Then, by a green field that shone like a thought of daylight amid the darkness of the moor, he saw a figure lying in the grass. It was a bolt upon the landscape, a mere huddled patch of dirty rags, yet with a certain horrid picturesqueness too. And his mind, though his German was of the schoolroom order, at once picked out the German equivalents as against the English. Lump and lumpen flashed across his brain most oddly. They seemed in that moment right, and so expressive, almost like an onomatopoeic word. If that were possible of sight. Neither rags nor rascals would have fitted what he saw. The adequate description was in German. Here was a clue tossed up by the part of him that did not reason, but it seemed he missed it. The next minute the tramp rose to a sitting posture and asked the time of the evening. In German he asked it, and Martin, answering it without a second's hesitation, gave it, also in German, 6:30, 6:30. The instinctive guess was accurate. A glance at his watch, when he looked a moment later, proved it. He heard the man say with the covert insolence of tramps, "Thank you, much obliged." For Martin had not shown his watch. Another intuition subconsciously obeyed. He quickened his pace along that lonely road, a curious jumble of thoughts and feelings surging. He had somehow known the question would come, and come in German, yet it flustered him and dismayed him. Another thing had also flustered and dismayed him. He had expected it in the same queer fashion. It was right. For when the ragged brown thing rose to ask the question, a part of it remained lying on the ground. Another brown, dirty thing. There were two tramps, and he saw both faces clearly behind the untidy beards, and below the old slouch hats. He caught the look of unpleasant, clever faces that watched him closely while he passed. The eyes followed him. For a second he looked straight into those eyes so that he could not fail to know them, and he understood quite horridly that both faces were too sleek, refined, and cunning for those ordinary tramps. The men were not really tramps at all. They were disguised. You can come closer into my arms if you'd like. Oh, it's not gonna make me uncomfortable, don't worry. There you go. More comfortable now, aren't you? Okay. I'll start again. The story. How covertly they watched me was his thought as he hurried along the darkening road, aware in dead earnestness now of the loneliness and desolation of the moorlands all about him. Uneasiness and distressed, he increased his pace, midway in thinking of what an unnecessarily clanking noise his nailed boots made upon the hard white road. There came upon him a rush to gather the company of these things that haunted him as unexplained. They brought a single definite message, that all this business was not really meant for him at all, and hence his confusion and bewilderment. That he had intruded into someone else's scenery, and was trespassing upon another maps of life. By some wrong inner turning, he had interloped his person into a group of foreign forces which operated in the little world of someone else. Unwittingly, somewhere, he had crossed the threshold and now was fairly in a trespasser, an eavesdropper, a peeping Tom. He was listening, peeping, overhearing things he had no right to know because they were intended for another. Like a ship at a sea, he was intercepting wireless messages he could not properly interpret because his receiver was not accurately tuned to their reception. And more, these things were warnings. Then fear dropped him like a night. He was caught in a net of delicate, deep forces he could not manage, knowing neither their origin nor purpose. He had walked into some huge psychic trap, elaborately planned and baited, yet calculated for another than himself. Something had lured him in, something in the landscape, the time of day, his mood. Owing to some undiscovered weakness in himself, he had easily been caught. His fear slipped easily into terror. What happened next happened with such speed and concentration that it all seemed cramped into a moment. At once, and in a heap it happened. It was quite inevitable. Down the white road to meet him a man came swaying from side to side in drunkenness, quite obviously feigned, a tramp. And while Martin made room for him to pass, the lurch changed in a second to attack, and the fellow was upon him. The blow was sudden and terrific, yet even while it fell, Martin was aware that behind him rushed a second man, who cut his legs from underneath him and bore him with a thud and a crash to the ground. Blows rained. Then he saw a gleam of something shining. A sudden deadly nausea plunged him into utter weakness where resistance was impossible. Something of fire entered his throat, and from his mouth poured a thick, sweet thing that choked him. The world sank far away into darkness. Yet, through all the horror and confusion ran the trail of two clear thoughts. He realized that the first tramp had sneaked at a fast double through the heather, and so came down to meet him, and that something heavy was torn from fastening that clipped it tight and close beneath his clothes against his body. Abruptly then the darkness lifted, passed utterly away. He found himself peering into the map against the signpost. The wind was flapping the corners against his cheek, and he was poring over the names that now he saw quite clear. Upon the arms of the signpost above were those he had expected to find. The map recorded them quite faithfully. All was accurate again, as it should be. He read the name of the village he had meant to make it. It was plainly visible in the dusk, 2 miles the distance given. Bewildered, shaken, unable to think of anything, he stuffed the map into his pocket, unfolded, and hurried forward like a man who has just wakened from an awful dream that had compressed into a single second all the detailed misery of some prolonged, oppressive nightmare. Oh, no, the story doesn't end yet. Do you want me to continue? Yeah? Okay. He broke into a steady trot that soon became a run. The perspiration poured from him. His legs felt weak. His breath was difficult to manage. He was only conscious of the overpowering desire to get as fast as possible from the signpost, at the crossroad where the dreadful vision had flashed upon him. For Martin, accounted on a holiday, had never dreamed of any world of psychic possibility. The entire thing was torture. It was worse than a cooked balance of the books that some conspiracy of clerks and directors proved at his innocent door. He raced as though the countryside ran crying at his heels, and always still ran with him the incredible conviction that none of this was really meant for himself at all. He had overheard the secrets of another. He had taken the warning for another into himself, and so altered its direction. He had thereby prevented its delivery. It all shocked him beyond words. It dislocated the machinery of his just and accurate soul. The warning was intended for another, who could not, would not, now receive it. This physical excursion, however, brought at length more comfortable reaction and some measure of composure. With the lights in sight, he slowed down and entered the village at a reasonable pace. The inn was reached, a bedroom inspected and engaged, and supper ordered with the solid comfort of a large bath to satisfy the unholy thirst and complete restoration of balance. The unusual sensations largely passed away, and the odd feeling that anything in his simple, wholesome world required explanation was no longer present. Still, with a vague uneasiness about him, though actual fear quite gone, he went into the bar to smoke an after-supper pipe and chat with the natives, as his pleasure was upon a holiday, and so saw two men leaning upon the counter at the far end with their backs towards him. He saw their faces instantly in the glass, and the pipe nearly slipped from between his teeth. Clean-shaven, sleek, clever faces, and he caught a word or two as they talked over their drinks, German words. Well-dressed they were, both men, with nothing about them calling for particular attention. They might have been tourists, making like himself in tweeds and walking boots, and they presently paid for the drinks and went out. He never saw them face to face at all, but the sweat broke out afresh all over him. A feverish rush of heat and ice together ran about his body. Beyond question, he recognized the two tramps, this time not disguised. Not yet disguised. He remained in his corner without moving, puffing violently at an extinguished pipe, gripped helplessly by the return of that first vile terror. It came again to him with an absolute clarity of certainty that it was not with himself they had to do, these men, and, further, he had no right in the world to interfere. He had no locus standi after all. It would be immoral, even if the opportunity came, and the opportunity he felt would come. He had been an eavesdropper, and had come upon private information of a secret kind that he had no right to make use of. Even that good might come, even to save a life. He sat in his corner, terrified and silent, waiting for the thing that should happen next. But night came without explanation. Nothing happened. He slept soundly. There was no other guest at the inn but an elderly man, apparently a tourist like himself. He wore gold-rimmed glasses, and in the morning Martin overheard him asking the landlord what direction he should take for Liddacy Hill. His teeth began to chatter, and a weakness came to his knees. You turn at the left of the crossroads. Martin broke in before the landlord could reply. You'll see a signpost about 2 miles from here, and after that it's a matter of 4 miles more. How in the world did he know? Flashed horribly through him. I'm going that way myself, he was saying next. I'll go with you for a bit if you don't mind. Well, the words came out impulsively and ill-considered. Of their own accord they came, for his own direction was actually opposite. He did not want the man to go alone. The stranger, however, easily evaded his offer of companionship. He thanked him with a remark that he was starting later in the day. They were all standing, all three, beside the horse trough in front of the inn, when at that moment a tramp slouching along the road looked up and asked the time of day. And it was the man with the gold-rimmed glasses who told him. "Thank you, much obliged," the tramp replied, passing on with slow, slouching gait, while the landlord, a talkative fellow, proceeded to remark upon the number of Germans that lived in England and were ready to swell the Teutonic invasion, which he, for his part, deemed imminent. But Martin had not heard it. Before he had gone a mile upon his way, he went into the woods to fight his conscience all alone. His feebleness, his cowardness, were surely criminal. Real anguish tortured him 1,000 times. 1,000 times he decided to go upon his step. And 1,000 times the singular authority that whispered he had no right to interfere prevented him. How could he act upon knowledge gained by eavesdropping? How to interfere in the private business of another's hidden life merely because he had overheard it? Some inner confusion prevented straight thinking altogether. The stranger would merely think him mad. He had no fact to go upon. He smothered 100 impulses and finally went on his way with a shaking, troubled heart. The last 2 days of his holiday were ruined by doubt and questions and alarms, all justified later when he read of the murder of the tourist upon Liddesey Hill. The man wore gold-rimmed glasses and carried in a belt about his person a large sum of money. His throat was cut, and the police were hard upon the trails of a mysterious pair of tramps, said to be German. Are you asleep? You did manage to fall asleep, huh? Well, sweet dreams, mi amor. Espero que tienes sueños bonitos.